If you're someone who needs a lot of storage or a secure place to store your data and access it quickly, then a cloud storage plan might not always be the right option for you. Saving your data in a cloud is convenient, since it's available anywhere and anytime. But it can also be expensive, slow, and just not efficient enough if you also want to dynamically work with your data. Especially on a local network like in your home, and with more and more routers supporting VPN capabilities, accessing files on a PC or server has never become easier. But in order to do that, we first need to set it up. Ladies and gentlemen, in today's video I'm going to show you how you can share folders and directories on your Linux system so that you can access them like you would on any other file server. But before we get into it, I quickly want to remind you that you don't forget to give this video a like, and if you're here at least a second time already, then you should also subscribe to the channel as well. Thanks, and let's begin. The first thing that we need to understand and decide upon is which network protocol we want to use. The most common ones for file shares are the server message block and the network file system protocols. SMB is most commonly used on Windows and is supported on most operating systems out of the box. NFS, on the other hand, is often preferred on networks that mostly or exclusively consists of Linux devices. Windows, for example, only supports NFS if you activate it manually, which, by the way, can only be done on Windows Pro and above. On the very common Windows Home editions, it's not integrated natively. In regards of speed, it doesn't really matter which one you choose. While it's true that NFS is faster when it comes to transferring a lot of small files, SMB is not that far behind, and as soon as you have bigger file sizes, there is no difference at all. From a usability perspective, the biggest difference between these two protocols is how they handle permissions. On NFS, you typically share directories to a certain network, while on SMB, you typically share it for everyone and rely on access permissions for users and groups. In short, if you have a Linux-only environment, then you might as well just go for NFS and utilize the advantage when it comes to small file sizes and a generally easier configuration due to how it handles its shares. However, if you also have Windows, Android or Apple devices on your network, then definitely choose SMB. But before we get into how to configure each solution, let's go over the base that you need to do for both. First off, you need to determine which directory you want to make available. This can be an existing one on a PC or server, or you create a new one. If you do, then it's a good idea to think about some best practices. Usually on desktop PCs, which are being used by you or other users, you typically create share directories in /srv. And on servers who don't need any dedicated user directories, you use /home. If you have mounted a dedicated storage, then you can also use /mnt to create a directory that you want to share. Now, share permissions are like a funnel. Whatever permissions you set on this directory, what didn't already get restricted earlier, can be prevented here. So make sure to set the directory permissions in such a way that a potential local user on the share system does have the correct permissions. While for most private shares, the default Linux file system permissions are enough, if you want to share this directory to several role groups, for example a sales department and a management which need different permissions, then I recommend you to use access control lists. Especially Windows sysadmins know how powerful ACLs can be, and frankly, Linux of course supports them simply by installing the package ACL. Okay, back to default Linux permissions. There are several ways on how you set them up, but they all essentially result in the same thing. You can use letters for a user, group, other, or set the same permissions for everyone. With a plus, you can add permissions, and with a minus, you delete them. I personally am more a fan of so-called octal numbers. For example, read has the value 4, write has 2, and execute has 1. Let's say I want to give my user full control, a certain group only read and execute, and everyone else nothing. So for my user, that would be 4 for read, plus 2 for write, plus 1 for execute. So we set 7. Then we take the group and give it only 4 for read and 1 for execute. And for others, we set 0, since we don't want anyone else to access the directory. But now, how do we know which user or group those settings apply to? Well, by default, it's just you. If you want to apply the permissions to a different user and group, then you can change it like this. Simply enter the name of a user or a group and of course the directory. If you want to use ACLs instead, then you can create several groups and set the permissions with the command setACL. Red Hat offers quite a nice documentation if you're interested. Okay, so now let's move on to the network protocols. For NFS, the first thing that we need to do is, of course, to download the packages. On Fedora and Arch-based distros, it's NFS utils, and on Debian-based ones, it's NFS kernel server. After the installation is complete, we want to edit the exports file in /etc/exports. Now we enter the path of our shared directory, a specific IP address or the whole network you want to share the directory to, and add some parameters in parentheses. RW means that the share itself does allow for read and write, and also execute, which is not mentioned here. Sync means that changes are always synced with the host. This is the most basic configuration, and depending on your network requirements, like speed or how many people access it simultaneously, you might need to change some settings. I'm leaving a link down below. Let's save and quit, restart the NFS service, and we're done already. On our Linux clients, once we have installed the NFS components there, we can now access our NFS share via the file manager. One thing that is worth mentioning is that if you have several user accounts or groups, then you might need to check if the UID or GID respectively matches on the host in order for the permissions to work correctly. Okay, so now let's move on to SMB. The procedure is essentially the same. Install the packages and open up the config file in /etc/samba/smb.conf. If you want to create a new share, go all the way down, define the share name like this, set the path of your directory, make it writable, or otherwise it would be read-only, and if you want, then you can also make it browsable so that users can find it in the network tab without entering the names manually. Now we want to save the configuration, but unlike on NFS, we also need to set a dedicated password for our user that you are going to use to access the share. Type sudo smb passwd-a, your username, and enter a password. Finally, let's reload the SMB service and we are done. In order to connect to our SMB share, we simply access it with SMB, the IP or hostname of your share PC, and the share name. Now you enter the username of your server-side user account and the Samba password you set, and you now have access to the share. If you want to mount it, every time you boot into your system, you can edit the /etc/fstep file like this. And there, you've now successfully shared a directory over your network on Linux. And if you've also set up a personal VPN, then you now also have your own cloud. If you found this video helpful, then I would be very happy if you would show it with a like and also subscribe to the channel. Right here, you can already continue to watch the next video. And all that's left to say now is good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I'll see you around.